Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning into the Smarter Building podcast powered by Symetri. My name is Richard and I'm the Construction Business Area Director at Symetri. I host this podcast along with Nicole with the intention of helping everyone involved in the design, construction and ongoing operation process of a building keep up with the evolving digital landscape as clients' demands for smarter and more sustainable buildings grow. Every other week, we chat with industry experts around best practice, new legislation, trends and technology. And one of the hot topics in industry right now is augmented and virtual reality. So on today's show, I'm joined by Dan Bambridge, Senior Client Partner for Digital Twins EMEA at Unity. Thanks for joining us, Dan. It's great to have you. So before we delve into anything too technical around augmented reality, virtual reality and digital twins, it'd be good just to get a little bit more information about yourself. If you could tell us a bit about yourself, your interests and hobbies, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I lead Unity's UK and Ireland AECO, so that means I'm the main point of contact for all of our AECO accounts. Based in London, South London, in the little area of Camberwell. Interests and hobbies. I'm currently planning a bit of a major renovation right now of a house in Dublin. So I hope to move there next year. So it just feels like all my free time at the moment is taken up picking out windows, floors, doors, windows, all that good stuff. So not too much time for the hobbies at the moment. I guess only a little bit about me. Well, I'm planning obviously a little bit of an office in this home renovation. I'm thinking it's going to be a bit of a getaway for sports and beers and maybe some gaming as well. So maybe that gives you a bit of insight. But yeah, that's me.
Nice. Why Dublin? Was there anything?
That's where my girlfriend's from.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, go to South Dublin.
Perfect. Cool. That's great. Unity seems to be a bit of a big beast in terms of I see little badges everywhere and solutions powered by Unity. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it works, how the organization works, and the focus you have? You've kind of mentioned it's around digital twins and EMEA, but it'd be good just to talk a little bit more about the beast that is Unity and what it brings to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's massive beast. Number of use cases is incredible. Really, really wide variety of where Unity is being used. Obviously, predominantly background is in the gaming world. So 2004 jumped on the train that was building apps and games for mobile smartphones and that kind of thing. And then kind of organically over the years started getting picked up by not only the AECO world, but also the manufacturing world, the aerospace, retail, and everything in between, basically. And all of that was completely organic, just people using our technologies because they realized it was a new way to make use of their data and make it more presentable, more engaging, more interactive. And then, that's where our division has been born. So we're in the digital twin division. We use that term really, really broadly at Unity, just because obviously we've got those other sectors to cover as well. But my focus on the AECO side is about helping architectural world, engineering world, everything in between to help these guys leverage their data really and understand how they can get a little bit more out of it. And then we get into the world of virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D real-time applications, that kind of thing. BIM workflows. Digital twins is obviously the North Star that's being talked about a lot at the moment. So helping these guys kind of get on that journey, understand how to use the technology, a lot of the art of the possible, a lot of education there, but ultimately how to use that towards digital twins and where the value is for each of those players in that sector.
Okay. And in the AEC space, what are the key sort of strands? What are the key pieces that have driven benefit for architects, engineers, and the construction businesses? What's been the most successful implementation or use case, as you've termed it?
A million different use cases, but I think the main value that Unity brings is interrogating this data in a new way. So it's being able to do a little bit more with it, take it to that next level. So obviously all of these organizations in this sector have spent years and years coming up with data standards, BIM processes, getting this data to a really, really mature level. So loads of investment, loads of time put into all of that data. And where Unity comes in now is, right, you're going to hit a particular ceiling or a particular rooftop when it comes to the authoring tools, the CAD world, the CDE world, that kind of thing. Where Unity comes in is this next level. So being able to take all that data, read it, ingest it, combine it with other bits of data, and then put it into a format that gives it new value, new meaning. So it's all about interpreting that data in a new context. So we think about like VR, for example. It's been around for obviously absolutely ages, but it's still a means to look at the data in a new context or a different context, get a new perspective on it, get it into a one-to-one scale and understand that data. I think probably where the real value comes in, because like I say, VR and AR have been around for absolutely ages, but where the real value comes in is adding more context to it. So what Unity does really, really well is ingest this data with other different sources as well. So we talk about ingesting IoT data or 4D, 5D, 6D, 7D data and bringing that all into Unity as well. So not only have you got a VR experience, for example, just using VR as one use case, but then you've got all of these different bits of data that you can then visualize and bring into one kind of context. So all of a sudden you get people in VR that are looking at their data and being like, oh, wouldn't it be useful if we can see it in this context with this bit of data, and then I can make this decision on it, or my customers can, or my stakeholders can, and they get more value from that data ultimately.
Okay. And is there one piece of data, is there one element that the construction industry architects have successfully looked at or visualized that you think is driving their adoption? Why would they buy it? What's the first piece they go to, or is it always a different element?
Use cases really, really vary across the whole life cycle. I think in those early design stages, all about interrogating the design, so using VR for design of views. We did some stuff around collaborative design of views, bringing the multiplayer side of the business into design of views, so you could have multiple people. If you imagine during COVID as well, people working from home, so bring them into different contexts. The next stage, you might have bringing that BIM data on site for construction, being able to then visualize one-to-one how that looks like, so they can really easily see, I've got my design, I've got what's being built at the moment, where are the discrepancies there, and how do I highlight them and point them out and make the right decisions across that chain. I can keep going. There's a million different use cases for each different stage.
Yeah. In terms of adoption of the technology, and as you say, it's been around for ages, but this will still be very new to quite a few of our listeners. Are there any dependencies? Is there anything that they have to have in place in order to enable the adoption of this technology? How should organizations look to bring together this data before they start looking to adopt this technology?
Yeah, I think there is an element of digital maturity that's needed. That said, I'll give you an example. So yes, it does help to have a data strategy in mind. Okay, you've got all this data, you put loads of time and energy and investment into the data that you've collated. And then it's okay, where are the dots to connect? How do we want to get this in front of the right people to make a new decision, or where are these efficiencies that we can make? So it does help to have that data strategy, but there are other cases whereby, by jumping into VR or jumping into AR, we can point out, actually, wouldn't it be useful if we were to gather this kind of data? We can see it in this context as well. So then it does inform that original digital strategy. I think, every man and his dog, every company has got a VR headset or AR headset that's gathering dust in the office somewhere. I think it's been around for a long, long time. And over the last kind of 5 years, there's been just that checkbox to say, yeah, we've explored VR and AR. Didn't really understand it, didn't really look into the art of the possible. And so we didn't really get the most out of it. And so now there's that headset gathering dust somewhere. I think we're now getting that second round coming through. So loads of people now are revisiting it and saying, okay, let's actually do this properly. Let's think about the maturity of our data now and all the processes and stuff that we put in place there. Now let's think about what is that next level? How can we then learn about the art of the possible? And that's where our team comes in, our division comes in, because we do act as those kind of educators, and because there's so much to be done with this data. There are so many different options, but it's a case of, all right, well, let's look into the art of the possible. Let's look at the challenges as well, and then work backwards from those problems into the art of the possible. And we can start to connect some dots that way, if that makes sense.
Okay. And on that, in terms of current adoption, how much of the AEC sector do you think are properly adopting this technology? You mentioned AR and VR headset tech kicking around an office, but what percentage of the AEC space are actually using this tech and driving benefit from it right now?
Well, I think there's a bit of a shift. So the architectural world and the engineering consultancies, those guys have been using VR and AR. They've been on the train for a long, long time. They're doing some incredible stuff. And they've always been at the very, very forefront of how to use this technology and get the most out of it. We see new services being created. We see people using Unity's technology and others as well in the real-time 3D space to create whole new offerings, and they're now monetizing them with their customers, and they've been doing some fantastic things to differentiate themselves in the market for absolutely ages. I think the contracting and construction space has been a bit of a lagging behind in that regard, but now we're starting to see a real trend of those guys saying, "Oh, there's actually been a lot of progress in the engineering and architectural space." And then we get into the world of kind of golden thread, and I think I've actually seen it on one of your presentations before, where you talk about this data maturity, and then at each handover, each stage, it starts to drop again, and there's that loss of consistency in that data, as we talk about the golden thread going across all of those channels. And construction's now saying, well, look, all of these guys are making the most of their data. Why are we not doing the same as well? And so we've had some fantastic organizations come back to us and say, look, how do we make the learnings from these guys? How do we learn what the best bits of what they've been doing and apply that to their own business? So they're more interested in learning about the art of the possible now. But I'd say, yeah, the architectural world and engineering consultancies have been doing it for a long, long time. And the construction side is only starting to catch up now. They're starting to revisit it, which is great to see.
Yeah. And what are the challenges of getting that rolled out at pace? Is it simply mindset, or are there some other challenges that we need to help tick off?
Mindset is definitely a part, for sure. I think hardware plays a part. Being able to scale that up, because you've got a bit of cost involved there. Hardware and software, there's cost involved. And obviously with margins, that's always a tricky part. But there's also the element of barrier to entry, or barrier to creation, I should say, which is being able to access this software without the relevant expertise or without that on hand really, really easily. So the architectural and engineering world, they've got developers, they've got that capability to hand them a challenge and say, solve this with some of the software that you've got. The construction side doesn't necessarily have that as much available to them. They don't have that army of developers sitting there waiting to build stuff. So there's been that barrier to entry, needing that capability and expertise at hand to go away and develop and solve those problems. But then back to your mindset point, yes, I think not knowing the art of the possible and what this technology can do to solve particular problems is definitely an element. And like I say, though, I think they're catching up now. There's a lot of data strategists, a lot of data maturity to get to that point where they're saying, right, we put loads of time and energy into this. How do we maximize and get more out of it? And that's why they're coming back to us.
Do you think off-site construction could be a big driver as well, in terms of bits not being put together on site, but you're having to visualize what something being built in a factory will look like when it arrives at site, and how it can be held within the rest of the building and the model, I guess?
Yeah, it's a leaner form of construction, right? So I mentioned it earlier, the manufacturing side of Unity has been doing these kind of things for years. So aerospace, automotive, those guys are absolutely miles ahead on how they've got really rich data and what they're doing with it. But it's probably easier for them. They've got smaller assets, right? Less complex assets in some terms. And it's also they're in control of that whole data pipeline from design all the way through to engineering, construction, whatever it is. They're in control of each stage of that data. Whereas on the construction side, lots more complex assets, a lot more data, a lot more different players involved in that whole process. So it's a little bit tricky. But you're absolutely right. With the lean construction and DFMA side of things, you're starting to take a lot of leaves out of the the manufacturing playbook, the manufacturing way of working and using that data. So yeah, that's a really popular area for us, because we can use that manufacturing knowledge, construction knowledge, and there's a Venn diagram where there's lots of learnings to be made in the middle. We don't know all the answers. We're still working them out, and I think the sector is as well to drive that DFMA approach. But yeah, really popular area.
Okay. And you've mentioned digital twins a few times now, and with putting a bit of more of a focus, and as building owners get on board with digital twins, I still think it's in the early stages of adoption and concept really with those guys. Where will Unity, AR, VR sit and play with clients? What's the sweet spot for clients in terms of almost forcing construction companies, AEC companies, to use this kind of tech?
Interesting question. So the way that I see VR and AR in these cases, in a digital twin, case, and I'll use that term lightly because we use it quite broadly at Unity, but VR and AR, I think, are just windows of the data, right? They're just a means to interrogate this data and have a look at it. So it does rely on the step beforehand, which is the gathering all of this data. So digital twins are being used a lot in the major project side. So you've got a huge project. How can we use this data, or at least in the early stage, we can de-risk, we can simulate, we can look at how this asset's going to come together. And then once that maturity has gotten to a certain point and that handover has happened, there are some kind of core use cases that are coming out of digital twins. Plugging into BMS systems, plugging into IoT data and that kind of thing. But there's still so much untapped potential there where you can, really make decisions about the operations of a particular building across, but by bringing these different data layers together, if that makes sense. So I think the funny thing that we're seeing right now is that owner operators are looking to the rest of the supply chain to say, well, how do we use this data? How do we make the most of it? And maybe they're making a demand at some stage of it, and it's a little bit too late because that process already started. But it's all going to be a case of everyone working together and kind of talking to each other about where they're finding value in this. It's funny, we're seeing, the architectural world using some of this technology, and then by the time it gets to the other side of things, that handover, it's a little bit too late because a lot has happened in between there. So it's a case that needs to be more collaboration to work towards what are the end goals of being able to use this data? What is the art of the possible? How do we get there? What data do we need to be gathering across each of these stages? And then we need effective handover of that data across every stage. Where does Unity fit in? I think it's we're an aggregator, we're an ingester of all this kind of data and doing a little bit more with it. We're kind of being used as a centralizer a lot of the time, being able to plug in at each stage, we're almost like a bit of a federator at each stage. People are plugging data into Unity, and by the time it's handed over, that Unity solution or application or repository is then being handed over as well, and that's then down to the owner operator to use that data how they want to drive efficiencies.
And you talk about being an area that's plugged into by multiple systems there, so BMS, IoT solutions. In terms of other solutions like a CDE during the project and a CAFM solution during sort of the owner-occupier's time, they would probably see themselves as aggregators of data too, right? So do you see Unity as working with those platforms as the tool to visualize the data from those platforms, or do you see the possibility for Unity replacing something like a CAFM solution and playing in that space?
Not replacing, very much enhancing, ingesting and enhancing. There's always going to be value in seeing that data in another context with more other bits of data. So one of the key ones, for example, is having that 3D world view of it. Things are much more easy to interpret, easy to understand, easy to get an idea of when it's in 3D. It's a natural way of looking at things, right? But if we can combine that with BMS data or a CAFM system, then great, we've got another element of data that adds to our layer of a digital twin that we can then better understand. But then we can always couple it with other sources as well. You'll have BMS systems and CAFM systems that will do a fantastic job of ingesting those key bits of data. And we want to just absorb that, we want to hoover that right up, and then ask the question, where else would this data be of use? In whose other hand? Because we can then democratize that almost and make it available to more audiences that can then better make a decision from that. So we've done digital twins that are bringing all these different sources together that make sense for operational teams, maintenance teams, operations, maintenance, security teams, design teams that then want to go back to the drawing board, simulation teams. There are so many different audiences that can make a decision from that. It's just a case of understanding what data is there, what kind of context do people want to access it in, and how we make it more understandable to them so they can make a decision. So completely enhancing it for sure.
Okay, yeah, it sounds really, really useful. I think there's a fear from owner occupiers that they're going to have to keep buying more and more and more and more tech. But if we can bring it together in one area, but then they can view it, I think that'll be really beneficial to them.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that's actually probably one of the key things that the Unity wants to get across. We're not looking to replace a lot of these tools. It's a case of getting more out of it, and that goes across every part of the stage. CDEs, BMS system, whatever it is, it's a case of doing a little bit more with it that's typically not possible currently.
Yeah, great. So just switching direction slightly, well, probably not switching direction, but moving on to the buzzword of this year, these months, metaverse. How do you see Unity sitting within the metaverse? What is the metaverse to you? Can you just give us a bit of information on that?
Very much a buzzword at the moment. I think, it's a complex one. A lot of hype around it, and I'm sure there's that bell curve graph that shows where metaverse is right now. A lot of people getting familiar with the idea and kind of just understanding it first and foremost. I think it probably scares a lot, especially on the AEC side. I tend not to use it too much. I think it can get a little bit daunting, saying, well, we're just getting started with digital twin. Why would we want to talk about metaverse and all of those kind of things? But ultimately, I think, my opinion, it's this new Web 3.0, right? It's this new age of hardware and software and cloud capabilities that means more people can access or consume a new type of media, a new type of content, a new type of data. So it's, we talk about 3D being at its core here, again, because it's more engaging, it's more exciting, it's more understandable, it's more interactive. So I think Unity's role here is to be this kind of SDK of the metaverse. We want to give people the tools and the ability and lower that barrier to entry to creating all of these kind of, whether it's VR, whether it's AR, whether it's just 3D interactivity, real time. We want to give people the ability to go away and create that kind of content. And if that is on a B2C perspective, or if it's in a B2B perspective, the Unity wants to be there and get involved. I think I'll plug our podcast that Unity's done recently called The Road to the Metaverse, which is kind of, again, trying to make it less scary, make it more understandable, and lower that barrier to entry.
I guess some would argue that the consumption and viewing of data in a 3D world with a headset on is the metaverse, or part of it. And I think, for me, it's not really that important, the word. It's, you're doing what you're doing to be more efficient, to be more effective, to understand in a greater detail. And maybe, I think it's good that you guys continue to dodge badging yourselves up as the metaverse providers or anything like that. It's interesting to just...
It's not going to be one system by any means. It's not going to be, I don't think, one universal Ready Player One type vibe. Maybe it will be in many years to come, but I don't think, at least in my foreseeable future, it's not going to be this kind of one place. There's going to be lots of different pocketed areas, and yes, interoperability would be amazing, but I think that's going to be quite a tough ask. But we'll see.
Okay. In terms of the environment we're operating in at the minute, obviously trading conditions are pretty tough for construction companies, with costs, labour shortages, increased legislation, focus on sustainability. How can we encourage organisations to adopt this progressive technology at this point in time? It's probably something that I ask most people on this.
No, great question. What we're going to see is less of a less expenditure on exploration. I think there needs to be more of a focus on, well, what can this technology do for us, rather than, well, let's see what's already out there and try and make it work for us and try and pigeonhole it into an area that's not really going to work. That will damage the reputation that these kind of technologies have in that organization, and therefore it won't get adopted, won't get scaled out, and it just becomes that tick box like I mentioned earlier. So it all comes back around to that digital transformation, or that digital plan, that game plan that's around, what is the problem first? What are we trying to do? What the kind of directions our organization going in? How do we want to use this data and get it in front of the right people in a format that makes sense to them? And how do we do so? And that's where people come to us with their challenges first, problem first. We talk about the art of the possible and where maybe technologies of this ilk have solved similar problems and similar challenges in real time, because that is the real value of where we're coming at it from. It's not even necessarily the 3D part. It's the real time element that we can make these kind of actionable insights in real time. Problem first, come with that strategy, and then we can talk about the art of the possible, and then we can start to think about ROI, right? It's always going to come down to ROI, because I think typically that's been really, really difficult for this sector to gauge when it comes to these kind of technologies. But if we start small and we think about what might be an entry point, and then we can start to snowball from there. As long as we're setting those standards as to what does success look like from this. If we look at this from a problem first perspective, then we can start to scale that, and then things start to snowball. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of future, what does the future look like for you in this space? What are the exciting developments that are coming down the track, which are really going to see this move to the next level and see wider adoption at speed?
So I think over the last couple of years, we've had a focus on out of the box, right? Lowering that barrier to entry so people can get familiar and just play around this tech with a lot less investment, a lot less barrier to entry. So they can play around with this tech, whether it's VR, whether it's AR, whether it's another element of real-time 3D, and they can say, okay, I can start to see the value in this. I can start to see where this can start to be used, and we can apply it to this kind of workflow, we can apply it to this use case and outcome. But that's always kind of been an entry point for us. And the next element is then the interoperability and customization side of things. So being able to say, well, let's take a tool that's maybe 50% or 60% of our requirements, and it's kind of doing bits of it, but that's just a starting point. When you start to get those other people come into the conversation and say, well, wouldn't it be useful if in VR or in AR or on this application we could bring in this kind of data, we could do this with it? That's where Unity's got the power to say, yes, actually we can do this because we've got this connection over here, we can do this, we can plug it into this. So a large focus of us right now, it's been the out-of-the-box stuff, and we're going to keep lowering that barrier to entry. But now it's all about this interoperability side of things and making sure that we can connect all these different sources of data, wherever they're coming from. So you mentioned your existing systems, existing expenditure and BMSs and CDEs and all these different acronyms. We want to capitalize on that and make sure that all of your existing investments are talking to each other. You can make the most out of it and do more with this data without having to say, right, scrap all of the stuff you've done in the last 5 years in your data strategy. Start again from the beginning just to adhere to this. Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. Have all of your systems kind of talk to each other in this kind of modular approach. And that's the approach that you need to try and take now. We're decoupling a lot of our technologies and making them talk to each other so we can do more.
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's great to hear how many organizations are talking in a similar fashion as well about interoperability of data. And you just hope we get to the point where it's better than it is today and there aren't the challenges of moving data from one place to another.
It's probably one of the key reasons that Unity is being adopted in these kind of spaces, because we can be this, it's an open development platform, right? So we can build these kind of connectors to all these different sources. So you're not being locked into that particular ecosystem. It's all very much, we can pull it, we can adjust it, we can do more with it.
Perfect. Okay. I think that's probably all we've got time for today. It's been great chatting to you, and really insightful. And I think most of our listeners will think so too. So thank you very much for joining us, Dan.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no worries. And to everybody else who listened, don't forget to follow and subscribe to ensure you don't miss an episode. Stay tuned for the next few podcasts. We'll be looking at digital transformation in the NHS, fire safety, the Building Safety Act, and sustainable construction. See you all soon.